Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another interview with a candidate for Maryland Governor. Today, I am honored to be here with Maryland Comptroller Peter Franchot. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for being here on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association in partnership with Stevenson University. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your service. We served together in the legislature, and I always like to describe Senator Zirkin as a rational, functioning adult who is a Democrat, who is proud of the Democratic Party. You and I both endorsed President Obama very early on, but we're not robots. And you and I are independent thinking, like most people. And I just want to congratulate you on the success of your career, and hopefully you'll be back in elected office sometime in the future.
Well, thank you for the first part of that.
Yeah, I probably got your wife all mad at me.
Right. Well, anyway, I wanted to thank you for being here. I'm excited to spend an hour with you talking about issues, substantive issues for the 27,000 members of the Maryland Bar Association. Before we get going, for those who don't know you, and I don't know how many there are out there, but those who may not know you, could you just tell a little bit about yourself, kind of just your personal background, how you have come to today running for governor of the state of Maryland?
Well, I've lived in Tacoma Park, Maryland for 41 years. I've been married to my wife, Ann Marr, for 41 years. We have a daughter who's 40 and married and has a 5-year-old granddaughter and 2-year-old grandson. And my son is 37, and both of these kids are very successful, and he has a young granddaughter, Lily. So I like to identify myself as a very happy, content Maryland longtime resident, and just a happy family. Like everybody in this, many people in this state, we are blessed by our families. And people don't know that I dropped out of college early, 1968. I dropped out of Amherst College because I wanted to work against the war in Vietnam. That was raging back then. I worked for Clean with Gene, Senator McCarthy, who was challenging LBJ. Unbeknownst to me, or I was somewhat clueless, I gave up my student deferment, so I got drafted while I was out campaigning for a stop to the end of the war. And I spent 2 years in the Army. That was a very beneficial 2 years for me. It really knocked the rough edges off me. And then I went to law school and came down to, worked in environmental issues for several years, then was Ed Markey's staff director for 6 years. He's now a U.S. Senator. Then I spent 20 years in the legislature. People don't realize that, but 20 years on the Appropriations Committee, and then the last 15 years as the state's chief fiscal officer, comptroller. So I don't need any on-the-job training. I am ready to rock and roll as the state's next governor.
So 35 years in elected office?
Correct.
Wow.
But all of it focused on the budget, and that's what I think gives me a certain leg up with some of my highly commendable primary opponents, who all of them are very, very impressive. But you know, for 35 years, I've been focused on the budget, and there's very little that the bureaucracy can do to trick me these days. I know everything about not only collecting the money as the comptroller, but also spending it as a member of the Board of Public Works, and I also am the paymaster. I write all the checks. So I think that gives me a certain perspective that you just can't duplicate, because it's you know, month in and month out, year in and year out, and it's a significant amount of experience that I think other people aspire to, but I'm lucky. I've had the experience.
So we've merged a little bit in question number 2, which
Right.
are the only set questions, which is a couple minutes before I get into specific issues on the stump speech. You know, why should Marylanders vote for Peter Franchot? Obviously, your experience on the budget, which you've just discussed, and what does a Peter Franchot gubernatorial administration look like?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think to the extent that I have been the chief fiscal officer for 15 years, that I've spent every day looking at the budget, that I have tremendous experience every other week on the Board of Public Works. Last week we voted on 150 state contracts, $650 million in state spending. You get a good perspective for what's going on in the different state agencies. And to the extent I've done that year in and year out, I've been vice chair of the Board of Trustees of the pension system. I'm the head of the Bureau of Revenue Estimates. I have all of this fiscal expertise, but it's combined with a love for the state of Maryland. And I'm committed to doubling the GDP, gross domestic product, of the state of Maryland in the 8 years that I hopefully will serve as governor. And we're going to make Maryland a go-to state. When I say safer, stronger, more prosperous, I mean it. We're going to improve the quality of living in every nook and cranny of the state. And you know, I've got a situation where a lot of people, when I show up, they say, we've seen you before, you've been here before. You know, every zip code of the state I've been in repeatedly. And I do that in order to connect with the voters. And so I don't mean to be, I'm not trying to say I'm special or anything. It's just that I've spent 15 years interacting with many, many people all over the state. And I get a lot of positive encouragement. I have a lieutenant governor who served until recently on the county council in Prince George's County. She is a phenomenal person, Monique Anderson Walker. I mean, she's better than I am, Bobby. She is a terrific public servant, passionate, experienced, just tremendous family person. And I can't wait to introduce her to the voters up in the Baltimore region particularly, but also around the state. I think we've got a kind of charismatic team that's going to do very well in the primary.
Okay. So let's get into it. Let's get into some substantive issues, and let's start with kind of reading the polls. The two of the more pressing issues, obviously, are public safety and COVID. So I start with COVID, if we could, because unfortunately this is
it's rearing its ugly head
it's
again.
rearing its head again, and just with the new variant going around, it looks like we're in for the long haul on this thing. So I guess my question is, you know, Governor Hogan has gotten very high marks for his leadership on this issue, both nationally and in the state. You know, I guess, what have we done right? What have we done maybe that's not been as right? You know, obviously it's a work in progress. Nobody holds any, you know, it's something so new that we're flying by the seat of our pants. But, and I guess more importantly, now that we have yet another variant and surging, where do we go from here?
Yeah, no, this has been a tremendous tragedy for the country and the state. We've lost over 10,000 Marylanders. We've had 60,000 cases. This pandemic has been a tragedy, both from a public health perspective and from a business perspective, because we've lost 40,000 small businesses that are permanently shuttered. The problem with the number one with COVID was we didn't take it seriously back in the early days, and we said we kind of, for political reasons, tried to downplay it, and that was a big mistake.
We being the country.
We being the
Donald
country.
Trump.
Yeah, not Governor Hogan. I have a good relationship with Hogan on this and many other issues. But we made a mistake as a country by not taking the pandemic seriously, and as a result, it got infected in our population. And then the second mistake we made was when we shut down the economy, understandably because we wanted to protect people, we didn't link it up with immediate relief. We just took a long time, and we lost a lot of small businesses nationally, but also in the country. So whatever we do with the new variant, I hope you're wrong that I hope it's not a big problem, but if it is a problem and we have to restrain our economic activities in order to get over it, I hope we immediately couple it with aid. And I'm not talking about long applications. I'm talking about you're a small business. If we're telling people that you can't be open, we need to write you a check right now. That works. And the federal relief has been, despite my concern about the amount of money that's come into the state of Maryland, I just thought this was crazy, because we're talking almost $60 billion over 16 months. That's proven to be enormously helpful, stabilize the state's economy. So what's worked is Governor Hogan's attention to public health and safety through vaccinations, making them available. I'm struggling right now with my own agency, which has almost 1,200 people in it. A significant number have not been vaccinated, and we want them to come back to work full-time, not remote. So my mother used to teach me that honey is better than vinegar and a carrot is better than a stick. So I think what we're going to do is offer the ones that are not vaccinated the opportunity to get vaccinated at no expense and give them administrative time off to do that. But then as of a certain date, we're going to require people to show proof that they've been vaccinated or have a daily or every other day test, so that should the variant prove to be a problem, we're not going to be exposing our folks to danger. But the key here is to try to work within the system that we have. And
so I guess and in thinking through this, and some candidates have said that they are more for vaccine mandates, and some have said that they're completely against it, and some in between. I guess the question is, if we are going to require it for state employees or healthcare workers or whoever, if that becomes a requirement, shouldn't we also extend it then to individuals who are acquiring services from the state, like, I don't know, I don't want to pick on kids, but like driver's licenses?
Yeah, but don't get me wrong. I want everybody to be vaccinated. No vaccination means we're going to have problems with the economy.
Forever.
So we need to have it done. It's been politicized. So now people on the right and other, get all sorts of misinformation. And they say, we don't want our kids, or we don't want us to have these vaccines. That's why I think honey is better than vinegar. Offer some incentives. And I think ultimately common sense will prevail and people will get vaccinated. The masks are another issue that we're struggling with a little bit, because I don't know about you, but when I wear a mask for a long time, sometimes I get a little sleepy because I'm not getting enough oxygen.
Yeah, it's challenging.
So hopefully everybody can get vaccinated. Down the road, I hope that the same vaccines that right now are mandated for K through 12, the measles, the polio, the mumps, the whatever it is that science and people are more or less comfortable with, you can require those. But I don't want to get into we're mandating this, given people's emotions right now. I want them to understand there's still a threat, understand we want them to protect themselves and other workers. We're willing to give them incentives, and just hold off on the stick.
So at what point in time, though, I mean, within an agency it's one thing, and within schools it's another, because obviously that precedent's already there. But at some point in time, these variants continue to move because there's a significant unvaccinated population. Better in Maryland than maybe any other state, or certainly most states. But at what point in time do we have to say, look, if you are to acquire state services, not just if you're working for the state, or if you're to work in these particular jobs, do we say enough is enough here?
Yeah, no, I think first of all the science has to be bulletproof. I mean, you can't go to people and say we're still studying whether it affects 5-year-olds or less, or 6-year-olds or whatever. Right. Your kids, for example. I don't want to have that kind of a situation where people have to prematurely do something. So once the science is set, I think then the school systems and others can have, maybe even the private sector. I think there are other things, but I'm just not ready as a public official to say we need to mandate all of this right now. I think what we need to do is make sure that people understand the common sense, accessibility, and importance of vaccinations.
Okay.
And I'm hopeful that we'll see a big bump up in the vaccination rates for our employees, for example, in my own agency, just because of the Omicron or something, whatever the new variant's called, because I think that's stimulating some action. But I mean, you've been in politics and you know how fragile people are on this. You start talking about young family members and people can get very emotional very quickly if they have the impression that sometimes, I mean, I remember growing up, we had to take polio vaccines back in the 50s. But we also had this big thing about fluoride in the water. I mean, it was like crazy. You couldn't even drink your tap water. Well, proved to be misinformed.
Okay.
But you don't want to, it's very difficult for us, I think, at this point, given the high intensity of the voters and the sensitivity to come in and be too heavy-handed.
Well, stay tuned on it. Just
Yeah, I'm
for
happy.
openness sake,
I hear where you're going.
My brother-in-law passed away from COVID. Was one of the 10,000 Marylanders who died
sorry
of
to hear
COVID,
that.
and so it's an issue that is of importance, from a public health standpoint as well as a.
Very sorry to
Thank
hear
you.
that.
It's,
And I can't emphasize.
Still going.
I mean, the fact that we've lost over 10,000 Marylanders is just stunning. And yeah, I want to see action too, but once again, honey rather than vinegar.
Okay. So let's move to the second one, which polls so highly with the voters, and for obvious reasons. I'm from the Baltimore area, and so not to pick on the city of Baltimore by any stretch, because crime is up everywhere, and certainly is up nationally. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. So I guess let me just open with just a general question.
Sure.
What does the Peter Franchot administration do on the issue of public safety, criminal justice, all those kind of interrelated issues?
Well, it's not just a Baltimore issue. There's a surge in crime all around the state, but particularly down in my area, the Washington area. There's an article in the paper today in the Post of the unbelievable increase in carjacking. These are kids, generally young adults who literally, they're incredibly callous. They just say, "Hey, we want to get a car to drive around in today," and they go in and they threaten someone. And my view as governor is, look, we obviously have a huge issue with police misconduct. That's been all over the country. I have zero tolerance for police misconduct. But I also say to the police, no public safety, no economy. We've got to have for a functioning economy, we've got to have safety. Secondly, I say that I have zero tolerance for criminals who harm other people. I mean, that is just, we have to punish them. And the article I mentioned in today's Post was some young people who held a knife for a young female Uber driver and tried to steal her car. They have to be punished. I'm not sure what the punishment is or what the prison sentences are, et cetera, but if there's not any punishment for something like that, they're just going to repeat it. So we need to be strong on both the issue of police misconduct, which is obviously something that is front and center for a lot of people in the state of Maryland, but also this basic concern about, are there violent people out there that are going to hurt other people? And so I like to call it the Bobby Zirkin space. That's where I am.
So, taking me out of it, the governor a few weeks ago, and there was a kind of a back and forth with the Senate president and some other legislators. The governor came out with a proposal that included, among other things, increased sentences for repeat violent criminals, and increased sentences for repeat convictions of illegal use of a handgun, and a kind of a greater emphasis on judicial transparency. All three have interest within the bar, within different sections of the bar. So what do you think about that? And then the Senate president shot back that these were reactive measures, not proactive measures, and kind of went to the jobs and healthcare, health equities and so forth. What do you think about the governor's proposals on these things? Should we be punishing repeat violent offenders more severely than we are right now?
I like to say I have a good working relationship with Governor Hogan, because I do. For the last 7 years, we've served on the Board of Public Works together, and there's some issues I agree with him on, some I don't agree with him on, but at least we're like functioning people who can communicate with each other. So on the issue that, sometimes I kid him and say, "Hi, folks, I'm Peter Franchot. I have a good working relationship with Governor Hogan, but I'm not running for president." And I think the problem right now is that the partisanship of competing for something like the presidential prize has taken over a little bit some of the agenda items for the governor. And I'm not suggesting that's abnormal or something. I'm a politician, he is. But I think that's what we're seeing a little bit here. So I think I have called him out on some of the adjectives that he's using to describe his initiatives, and also the partisanship that I'm not sure he actually writes it, but whoever writes his social media things are, they're pretty, well, I've taken him to task and said, I just don't think it's helpful to have that kind of language in talking about these sensitive issues. So my view right now is, I'm not in the legislature, obviously, I'm not the governor, but my basic view is, yeah, I'm going to be tough on police misconduct, and I'm going to be tough on criminal misconduct. The punishment we have to at least be somewhat rational about, and realize that there are different versions and stages of incarceration or punishment. But the key thing is, you've got to, if somebody does something harmful to someone else, they have to be punished. Otherwise, it's, hey, I'll go steal another car tomorrow. And,
right.
And the trauma that people have, citizens who are exposed to this kind of criminal violence, is, as you know, because you've been chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and at a higher level than I have, as many of these proposals are. But the mere fact that someone is held up or carjacked has an unbelievable impact, even if they didn't suffer any physical harm.
Right.
And obviously, when I say no public safety, no economy, it's what I'm talking about. People are afraid to go out and go shopping. So we need to have someone like myself, who happens to be compassionate and empathetic. I'm not doing this from a super harsh perspective. I'm doing it from a rational perspective, and I think we can deal with it. Other states have, and I'm very optimistic about Baltimore. I know there's a lot of challenging stuff going on, but when I say I'm going to double the GDP for the state, I mean the Baltimore region also, Baltimore County, Baltimore City. And we're going to do that through rationalizing the tax structure, figuring out what the best regulatory process is for new innovative businesses to locate in this region. And we're going to do it in the different regions of the state. So I'm optimistic that as we move forward, we're going to have alternative careers for some of these folks that we're concerned about.
So in the short term, and again, I'm not picking on Baltimore.
Sure.
I adore the city of Baltimore, and I live here. So, but for example, we have had a stubbornly high murder rate, and the non-fatal shootings are through the roof as well. Well over 1,000 of them every year. So it's like the 300 plus murders, and then a lot more than that just couldn't shoot straight. Thank God, because you'd have more on the other ledger. What do we do about that specifically? Like, what is it? The governor is proposing things, and I think people can argue with the policy, but he's got specific proposals for what he would like to see done. He's got concerns with how the state's attorney's office is being run in the city, and the number of people that are kind of getting out that maybe should not be getting out, and prosecution has gone awry. What do we do about this in the short term to stem this flow? Because I just not for editorial comment, but the last time I remember it being quite low was when Martin O'Malley was the mayor, and he and Giuliani, bless his memory, did the zero tolerance, which has certainly gone out of favor these days. But the murder rate was very low at that point. How do we get this thing under control?
I think it naturally will get under control as we get back to a more normal economy, which is very broken right now. I mentioned the federal relief that's come in. We're doing a complete top-to-bottom review of that money, because it's 3 times what I collect as the tax administrator in a year. It's a huge amount of free money. So we've got a certain amount of surplus that we're built up thanks to the federal relief, and also what we did in the comptroller's office. I extended the tax date from April to July. That resulted in a significant amount of surplus. So we, combined with the federal money, we have about $5 billion in surplus dollars that can be used creatively as far as perhaps dampening down some of the public safety issues in the city of Baltimore. But the long-term solution is to change the direction of the city. It's slowly losing population. Baltimore County is doing okay, and Howard County and Anne Arundel around them, but we need to have a regional approach to not just public safety, but also economic growth. And I am determined as governor to make Baltimore a city that once again is the beating heart of the state, not something that's known for its challenges, but known for its unbelievable new infrastructure that we're going to put up there. Tremendously expanding the airport, tremendously expanding the port, tremendously building on home ownership, and using things like the Howard Tunnel rebuild to produce 100,000 new jobs, each of them a path to the middle class. A lot of that is political rhetoric. A lot of people know me, that I want the voters to judge me by whether I respond to them, whether I respect them, and whether I get results. And that's what they're going to get with me as governor. Right now, I'm simply the comptroller. And I'm a good comptroller, and a lot of people say, could you possibly be comptroller and governor? And I say, no, guys, it doesn't work that way.
Are you going to endorse in the comptroller's race, not to get away from it?
I am probably not, and our side, Brooke Learman and Tim Adams are running. They're both capable public servants.
Political aside.
Yeah, that's okay.
Let me move on to something that's going on right now in the General Assembly. Just wanted to get your thoughts on it. There's obviously a revenue side to it, but they're going to be debating this year for the first time in a meaningful way the recreational use of marijuana. And I'm just curious your thoughts about it. We obviously have decriminalized marijuana and a medical program, which is pretty robust at this point. What are your thoughts about, should we legalize recreational use, and if so, how? And
well, my view is that I'm glad we can talk about a relatively normal issue like marijuana legalization as opposed to something like the situation with COVID and the public safety issue. But marijuana to me is a relatively small issue. If there is a referendum, as there should be, and people strongly support adult marijuana, not recreational use, but adult use, please, so that we don't have kids getting access to it. I can see that being something that we should bend to the will of the people, and most of all use the tax revenue to repair the damage that's been done to black and brown communities through enforcement of completely unfair punishments for possession of marijuana. So I can see some of that damage being repaired by investing some of the tax revenues from marijuana into those directly into those communities, and I can see us addressing the African American minority ownership of some of these new businesses by raising the minority business portion from right now it's 25%, moving up to 40%, which reflects the brown and black numbers demogrophically. So
is that for ownership, or is that for employees within
that would be
companies?
for that would be for ownership, because it's not just inclusiveness and diversity, it's ownership that's the key component to that particular sector. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I grew up during the 60s, and marijuana was a huge thing, and Jerry Brown was famously asked when he was governor, don't you support the legalization of marijuana? And his response was, they said it will help the economy so much. And his response was, well, how does it help the economy of California if half of us are stoned all the time? It's a joke. I'm willing to abide by the evolution, so to speak, of the acceptance of marijuana. But the fact that we're arresting people for illegal possession of marijuana and incarcerating them and at the same time legalizing it, there's got to be a certain irony there.
So
yes, you put me in the yes column, but it's got to be looked. The proof is in the pudding. It's
but only
what does
if
it look
it
like?
passes by referendum.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm not for a certain faction of the voters or elected officials saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. I think this is the type of subject that should have the approval of the voters through a referendum.
Okay. Well, I think that's probably what's going to end up happening. So we'll see in your first. The understanding is that's what that's how they're heading.
Well, I'm very interested in the taxation, because if we have some examples around the country where it's been very successfully taxed, and others where it's been a complete fiasco. So that's important. The issue of edibles is very important. How do you protect people's health? The advocates say nobody really dies from too much marijuana. Well, yeah, but they may have some very uncomfortable experiences if they eat a lot of an edible marijuana product and it takes longer to in other words, there are details.
It is
that need
definitely
to
a
be
complicated issue. Also, how to deal with the existing medical cannabis infrastructure, which has been around for some number of years.
Put me down as a tentative yes, but the devil's in the details.
Okay. So moving on from that to one you and I were discussing beforehand, redistricting. The legislature is, as we sit here right now down in Annapolis, debating, among other things, the redistricting proposal for congressional maps. Governor has been very out front in wanting a nonpartisan independent commission doing this, not politicians doing their own maps. You and I have both been around the block long enough to have gone through this some number of times. Isn't he right that is in fact a better way to do it, both for our congressional but also for our state legislative maps?
I agree with compact districts. I agree with independent commissions. What we've got going on right now is, two different maps with two agendas, both of them similar, which is they're both trying to take partisan advantage of each other. I'm not being critical of either side. I'm just saying, from my personal perspective, these districts should be compact, and they should be common sense, recognizable districts. You shouldn't have to worry about whether it looks like a salamander or a gerrymander, whatever that is. And it's not good enough to say, well, the other side is doing it in other states, and it's hurting our party, so we're going to do it here. I don't go along with that. I think that we should let the voters decide who represents them. Most importantly, we should not allow it in legislative districts, because 20% of the current House of Delegates members were appointed by central committees. And I am very concerned that these multi-member districts that we have, particularly for the House of Delegates, are abused and taken advantage of, and people get appointed by a small number of people, and it's an inside deal in a smoke-filled back room, and then they end up being there forever. I would much prefer single-member districts where voters know who represents them, and then a ban on party slates during the primaries, because that's how these political machines, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have extraordinary control and over their members, because they threaten them with punishment if at the next redistricting if everybody doesn't play ball. So power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. We should get, wherever we can, get gerrymandering out of our local, municipal, state, county, and any elected office in the state of Maryland.
So single-member House of Delegate districts.
Correct.
May get our wish depending on what happens in the Court of Appeals this year. So.
Well, whatever. Yeah, no, it can be, I'm happy to do it according to the rule of law. But you asked about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is something that's turned into a weapon for both parties, and it's not pretty, and it's often counterproductive. I also think that independents, of whom there are about 800,000 in Maryland, should be allowed to vote in the primary of their choice without any kind of change of registration necessary. Just they can go in if they want to vote in the Democratic or Republican primary. Why is that? Because these are 800,000 largely young people who don't want to register as a Republican or don't want to register as a Democrat.
So that's an interesting segue into another issue that you and I were discussing beforehand. and one that's of importance to the bar, which is judicial elections. In Maryland, district court appointed, court of special appeals appointed, court of appeals appointed, circuit court, strange elections. They get appointed and then have to stand for election, and so there are judicial elections. The only reason it was an interesting segue is independents actually often get disenfranchised in those votes because of the way the elections are held. So let me just open it up to you. What are your thoughts about judicial elections? Should we have them here in the state, or should we get rid of the judicial elections?
Get rid of them. The voters should vote for politicians. They should vote for referendums like the legalization of marijuana. They should not be voting on judges, period.
Would you go to a circuit court system, kind of the way we do district court? Right now, circuit court's appointed and then has to stand for election, but they will go up for 15 years. Would you move that back to 10 like the district court, or
No.
just leave it at 15 the way it is?
Just, we should get rid of them. We don't need them. The judicial system can take care of disciplining and weaning out folks that they need to, whatever the problems might be with existing judges. It's inappropriate in the sense that we ask judges to be non-biased and nonpartisan and totally objective. And you inject competitive elections into that, and I just don't agree with it, and would leave it up to the judiciary to discipline their own people.
Okay. So I have a whole bunch more. I just want to make sure we stay within our time
Sure.
frames. I wanted to do a little bit of a rapid round on a couple of things. There was an executive order, I think that went through the Board of, no, I guess it does not go through the Board of Public Works. It was based on a bill by Senator Kramer from Montgomery County having to do with the boycotting of the state of Israel, of all things that you wouldn't expect to be in Maryland. And so Senator Kramer's bill, which led to an executive order, which is now in place, says that companies that are involved in boycotting Israel cannot participate in state contracts, cannot participate in the pension system. They have to sign an affidavit that they are not participating in the BDS movement. It's been in place for about 4 years now. Governor Hogan put that in after Senator Kramer's bill was defeated. Will you, as governor, keep that order in place? I guess that's just a yes/no question.
Yes.
Okay.
Emphatically, because I've visited Israel. I mean, it is a marvel of a country because they've made a garden out of something that is, it's a different kind of climate than we have. And it's unbelievably successful, but unbelievably vulnerable to many states around it that have a hatred of Israel. So anything we can do to protect that important democracy over that. And I just don't agree. I'm not buying Ben and Jerry's anymore.
All right. School board election.
Did anybody catch that?
Yeah,
No,
I
probably,
did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I don't as well. School board elections. It's an interesting one. And I guess a new issue has popped up, which is the voting rights of the student member on school board elections.
Yep.
Thoughts about that? Baltimore County in particular had a really vicious fight over years about whether or not to have a elected, appointed, hybrid school board. Haven't really gotten into the fight yet about the student member, but thoughts about any and all of those issues?
Yeah, every school board should be elected.
Fully.
Every student appointee should have a vote. I mean, let's just cut through all the static.
Okay.
And hybrid boards don't work. Appointed boards don't work, in my opinion. Students deserve to have the respect if they're going to go through an election. Have a young person appointed or put on the board, let them have a vote.
Okay. Another controversial, I guess, issue is one that Delegate Morheim actually brought to the legislature some years ago. Never really has gotten anywhere, but it's the issue just moving, is this, I don't know what they call it, safe injection sites. It's this, I don't know if you recall hearing about this, the idea of having a place where people can go and use drugs legally, but with social workers and drug treatment and so forth there. It's been tried in some cities in Canada. seems to be something that people are talking about in America now in some cities here. Any thoughts about that? I know you shook your head. You hadn't.
No, the opiate epidemic is just mushroomed during COVID.
Yeah.
People are suffering from addiction. Many of them are mentally ill. It's something that needs to be treated, not as a law enforcement issue, even though they are often confronted with law enforcement. We need to work out how addiction is treated as a public health issue and not a criminal issue. And we need to provide, I'm not sure what Dr. Morheim was advocating, but we need to have a new approach towards our citizens who are sadly addicted and not responsible for their actions. And I'm a person that, has zero tolerance for police misconduct and for criminals, but I have a lot of compassion for people who are addicted. Particularly this OxyContin thing was just a debacle, and fentanyl now is apparently all over the place. So people get addicted. It's not necessarily their fault, and they're not able to get out of it on their own. So we need something that expands our society's approach towards how we treat addiction. And I think a lot of it is resolvable through coaching and through early intervention, but what we're experiencing right now is not working. And I would not necessarily go in the direction Dan did that you're mentioning, because I think that may clash with some folks. And but I am serious that we're going to upgrade addiction to something that is front and center as far as the state's responsibility to make sure that people have as much protection as possible.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm sorry to be bouncing around.
No,
here,
I'm happy.
Again,
what a yes or no? Go ahead if you have a few others.
I'm gonna move away from yes no and just open it up for you in terms of something an issue. I know that you were, I believe, when we were together in the House, that you were the subcommittee chair on transportation. If
yes.
my memory serves me, that's a long time ago.
Transportation and the environment.
Thoughts about transportation and what we should be doing here, and again, obviously with cost in mind, where do you see in a Franchot administration in terms of mass transit, roads, and bridges?
Yeah,
so forth?
no, that's a great question. I'm a champion for mass transit because I believe it's essential to getting our workforce from school to work and back, from their home to work or home to school. We need mass transit. It's required by the environment, but it's also required by the fact that a lot of our low-wage earners do not have the resources to own cars, and they don't own their homes, they rent, and they need mass transit. So I'm in favor of any mass transit that's reliable and frequent and fast. And when Governor Hogan was elected for the first time, he was campaigning against the Purple Line, which is a big mass transit proposal in our Washington area. And I went and said, you really need to rethink this because it's ready to go and it's a great project. To his credit, he did. He turned down the Red Line up in Baltimore. Retrospect, that was a mistake because we had the federal funding lined up. I'm a huge champion of mass transit. In Baltimore, it's been used, unfortunately, to segregate some of the east and west parts of the city. People do not have adequate mass transit to get from where they live to where they work. It's well over an hour for a lot of mass transit because it hasn't been properly connected. So mass transit should be supported. It can have it can be vastly improved as far as its connectivity. What we need to do is also help the congestion on the highways. We can't, just say, hey, I'm for mass transit, but I'm not for bridges and roads. No, we have to be for bridges and roads. There has to be a balance, and that's why I'm supporting the governor on the American Legion Bridge. 270 project down in the Washington area. That's a $7 or $8 billion project. It's going to involve some toll lanes, which are a little controversial, but it's going to maintain still the free lanes. But we have to deal with congestion because it hurts our economy, number one. Number two, all the cars are turning electric, so it's the old complaints about the internal combustion engine are not as real. When I come up to Baltimore, we've got to do something up in the Baltimore region because at rush hour, everything stops. So what that is, I don't see that as toll lanes, et cetera, but I see that as something where reversible lanes and using shoulders and having new exit and on-ramps and signals, et cetera, might be helpful. And I think we need to look at that. But the key thing is highways and mass transit. We need big investments in both.
Is there a priority list for you in terms of mass transit? And again, I don't.
Yeah, there is. Red line. I'm all about the red line.
What is the cost of that for the state?
We're mapping that out. I asked I happen to think, and this is not something I'm going to, I've spoken about it around the state, but I don't think I think first of all we need to really work on the mass transit network of buses in the city because they're obviously not connected. It takes forever to get from one side of the city to the other. For the red line, I kind of like the idea of rather than burrowing underground, which is an environmental issue, putting a big subway in, or doing a light rail in quotation marks, which look like CSX locomotives going through Baltimore City intersections. I kind of like the idea of an elevated monorail, east-west. I've asked the Department of Transportation to take a look at it. Is it a reasonable alternative for mass transit to be considered? Obviously, it would have to be something the city leaders want. But the reason I like it is it's got a futuristic identity to it. It would be a sleek, yes, but unlike Disney World, which is generally what the transportation experts look at me and guffaw. No, it's not a tourist thing. It's something that you could see over in Europe. Sleek, red, modern, futuristic, something that people see and might want to fly into BWI simply to experience. So I'm thinking of proposing new, affordable, pragmatic things like a monorail, just to be considered by the local jurisdictions. It's obviously something they have to buy into, but from a cost perspective and from putting Baltimore on the map and communicating that it's really going to be a modern city of a great state like Maryland, and we're not going to leave it behind, that might be the kind of transportation investment that makes sense. But
is that in lieu of what they were proposing for the red line, or
correct?
Is it kind of and would that be any idea? Does that cost more or less, or we're not sure yet?
Put it this way: Maryland is right now a prosperous state. We have plenty of money. When I talk about money, and I say we have $5 billion sitting in the state's checking accounts, it's because I'm the chief fiscal officer. I know that. We saw a surge in business tax payments because we extended the deadline. We also saw the federal relief come in and get mixed into the tax revenue. So there's plenty of money. The question is, are we going to do something that makes Maryland a go-to state? Where, remember you and I, we should think about going out to Seattle just to see their monorail or the Space Needle or whatever it was they had out there. That's what we need to do for Baltimore, so that the city gets beyond some of the challenges that it faces. You mentioned public safety, and we start focusing on the city being an unbelievable growth center for Maryland once again. Okay. And I call it the beating heart. And Baltimore County is part of that, obviously. And Stevenson, which is doing so much expansion now. Thank you for being delighted to be here at Stevenson University, because it's a gem. And they've partnered with the state on, I think, some very intelligent expansion.
Yes. All right, so I'm going to move on. I'm getting the high sign over there. but an issue that just was in the papers just the other day, I believe, it was a court case, but regardless of the details of the court case, having to do with renters. Kind of the general issue of renters' rights and renting and landlord. Last year, the General Assembly wrestled with access to counsel or right to counsel. The bar is very interested in access to justice in general. So I guess I will throw out to you thoughts about, evictions and keeping people in their homes, but yet being, fair to landlords who obviously own these properties and property rights and so forth. It's a general question, but just any thoughts about
it's a good question, because it's a structural problem with the state. We have a fire hydrant of cash coming in from the federal government. We received $750 million for rent relief alone. The state did. The state immediately balkanized it and told the counties to come up with their own applications, and it was a complete fiasco. Every county's got different things and requirements, and you're a lawyer. I was a wannabe lawyer at one point, but you know, to ask a low-wage earning tenant to fill out a 30-page legal document, you know, to assert that they actually deserve the relief, and when the relief is going to the landlord, not to the tenant, is ridiculous. And as a result, we may have to return a significant amount of the $750 million because it's sitting in this checking account, and the feds, understandably, are saying you guys aren't spending it. We're going to give it to another state. So Maryland has botched the tenant relief. What they should have done is ask the landlords to come in, verify under some oath, some affidavit, that the rent has not been paid to them, particularly the small landlords, and the state should have written a check out right there. We have the money, we still have the money, but it's been caught up in a constipated system where everybody's scared of their own shadow, and therefore their money is just not being allocated. And so the landlords lose.
Is that because of the state or because of the
Because
local
of the
jurisdictions?
state. Because of the state.
Because some local jurisdictions have acquired.
Some are a little better than others, but overall we're doing so badly they may take some of the money back. I mean, that's how bad it is. We're talking less than 30%. So the key here is that the state, unlike I hate to say the federal government's better than the state, the feds did the right thing, gave us the money. We then did the wrong thing, and we farmed it out, and it has proven to be you know, a very difficult situation. And as a result, landlords are not getting compensated. Tenants now possibly are facing eviction. The money was there, the money's still there, and we, the comptroller's office, could verify landlords as being valid. And the reason all this happens, Senator, is because of a fear of fraud. So they pile up these requirements, and it's proven when you have this kind of crisis, the money needs to get immediately to the recipients, which in this case are the landlords. And
is this for
so it should
just residential or
change.
commercial too?
Both. Yeah, no, it should. The landlord should go up and say, look, here's our proof that our tenants have been unable to pay the rent. We've allowed them to stay in their homes if it's residential or in their commercial spaces, but we've lost X amount. And we're willing to sign an affidavit. And the comptroller just gave you the okay that we're legit. We pay our taxes.
And when does that
And
stop,
then,
though? Like, at what point, if COVID's going to be around forever, at what point, I mean, we have the money now from the feds. So let's just say a Franchot administration gets that straight, gets all that money out. So kind of moving forward.
yeah,
though,
no, you have to play it by ear. We can't, you know, what we expect in Maryland right now, like a lot of states, is, oh, now COVID is more or less under control. We flip the switch and start the economy and people can pay their rent. Well, it takes a few 5-6 months to sometimes get back on your feet. But the key is not to be terrified by the prospect of fraud, which is what all of us politicians are always worried about. And just say, look, we understand that there may be a little marginal fraud here and abuse. The key thing is that there's a lot of legitimate loss of ability to pay rent because of the COVID situation, and the landlords should not be stiffed. So let's pay it to them and give them a suggestion that they not evict for 90 days to make sure their tenants can get back to work. And then, but you're right, it's not forever. It's, simply to get beyond where we are right now. Once the COVID is like the flu and controllable, then, which I think will happen sooner rather than later.
I hope so. All right, we have about 5 minutes left, and I definitely want to give you a chance at the end of this just to give us our summation. I have a number of big topics, but I guess I will end with one. We got a number of questions from members of the bar about immigration, and I'm just I'm gonna make this just a general question. There have been a number of bills in the General Assembly, some, in my opinion, better than others, but lots of issues related to immigration, which you would think would be more of a federal issue. What are your thoughts about that from Maryland law? You've had the bill about these contracts between local jurisdictions and ICE, and the coordination between ICE and local jurisdictions. There's been a lot of fire around this issue over the last few years. Any thoughts on that
Well,
issue?
I was the one as comptroller who alerted the governor and the legislature to the fact when they were handing out COVID relief checks, understandably, to people that had no money. They couldn't pay their rent, they couldn't buy food, they didn't have money for medicine. So I said, you need to include ITIN filers. Who are they? They're people that are immigrants, do not have social security numbers, they have a worker employment number, they've paid taxes. In this case, last year, 86,000 families paid $100 million in state taxes. So we had that information, and we said you really need to include them. They weren't really included. They were included in the EITC program, but it was better than nothing. What we need are immigrants to come. We need new young adults in Maryland to have a prosperous economic future. I keep telling conservative businessmen who sometimes complain to me about immigrants, we need immigrants, because if we don't have new young adults moving to the state, we're going to face a big drop-off in our prosperity, because we need that workforce. And we need, that's why I've suggested, this is not the immigrant issue, but it has a sense of what we need in Maryland. We need 100,000 new young adults to come to our state. Innovative, entrepreneurial, high energy, willing to start a small business. We need them in order to, we have a $400 billion GDP, but in order to keep that up, or to double it, which is what I'd like to do, we need more people, because you're not old, I'm getting old. So we need young, talented people. And this anti-immigrant story out there is a bad one for the state of Maryland. We need to welcome new people to our state, because by and large, 95% of them are hardworking, pay their taxes, raise their families, they're friends or neighbors, they're people that work in our companies. And we're just impoverishing the state if we stand up and say, no more new people. No, we need new people. And I, as governor, will put a welcome mat out. Kid people and say, I'll stand at the border with a six-pack of Maryland craft beer. We need young people desperately in our state, demographically, so that we can have 30 years from now the kind of prosperity we're accustomed to.
All right.
Thank you.
So we have a minute left.
Yeah.
The floor is yours. What to tell the 27,000 members of the bar?
Yeah.
One last summation of the Peter Franchot stump speech.
Yeah, I mentioned the proof is in the pudding, and I've been a good comptroller for 15 years. And recently we announced a $2.5 billion surplus. We're going to add another $2.5 billion this year we're in, and next fiscal year. That's proof positive that I've done my job as a good chief fiscal officer. I will make a great CEO because of that experience and that perspective, and what I've learned from my many years focused on the budget, both in the legislature and the last 15 years, day in and day out, working on the Maryland economy. So no on-the-job training. This is, I don't have a particularly compelling life story, perhaps. All I've done has been a good public servant who's honest, accessible. I give my personal cell phone number out to, in fact, I'll give it to your lawyers because they're such people of stature, 301-332-1961. It's my personal cell phone. I'm going to keep it as governor, and I want to connect with Marylanders. And all over the state, I have people say, we know who you are, we like you, and I say back to them, not only do you know who I am, I know who you are, because I've been all over the state. And I think that's what people want right now. They want some experienced, steady hand at the helm, particularly with the economic consequences of COVID and the need for the state to improve its prosperity. So I think I've got a great shot at it. I don't mean to sound like I'm overconfident. I'm not. I'm running against Democrats who are very, very eloquent and have compelling stories themselves. And we'll have Republican opponents, but I've gotten a record number of votes over the last 4 statewide elections that I've been in. And I think the reason is that folks see me as, yeah, he's a Democrat, but he's not a robot, and he actually thinks about things and wants to do the right thing for the state. So that's me in a nutshell. My first priority is my family, of course, but I do go back to my drill sergeant in 1968, because down at Fort Jackson in South Carolina, he really taught me that there's nothing special about me. It's, are you on the level with people? And that really knocked the rough edges off me. That gave me a certain seriousness, and I hope to finish my career as governor of the state of Maryland.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We just want to say one more time, just on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association and Stevenson University, thank you so much for spending an hour with us today, and good luck to you, and we look forward to seeing more.
Great university.
All right.
Thank you, and thanks to the bar.